and 20% to 10% respectively to the artist, which is one of, if not the worst deals in the entire music industry. When this is with a solo singer, it's still an incredibly uneven and exploitative divide in the worker and employer dynamic, but this is significantly worse in the context of bands which have as many as 3 members such as Triple H or 13 members like the band 17. If you take a band with 6 members that brings in $1 million with a 90-10 split with their label, this means that the label receives $900,000 and the group receives $100,000, meaning that each member would get only $16,000. This is made even worse when you take into consideration that once idols have gone through the training process, most labels will immediately place them in debt and require them to pay back for their singing lessons, dance lessons, accommodation, exercise training, clothing, and more. Also, if you decide to drop out of training before you debut, you're still required to pay back the money they've spent on you. Some labels will forgive the cost of training upon completion, but this is rare, and they'll still require you to pay them back if you drop out prematurely. K-pop contracts aren't limited to the physical appearances of their artists though. Given that these are public figures, there are clauses which dictate how they're supposed to conduct themselves in front of the media and fans. This can include typical things such as not being able to disparage their label, bandmates or other bands, avoiding debaucherous behaviours such as drinking and taking drugs, and avoiding being seen in romantically and sexually charged situations. The latter rule extends further than their public image though, and many labels will demand that K-pop stars remain single while signed to them in order to make them appear romantically available to their fans, which is in itself a paradox and sexually exploitative since it uses singers as what could be described as relationship bait for their fans. In 2018, it emerged that Hyuna and E-Dawn from the band Triple H were in a secret relationship for 2 years despite their contract stating that they weren't allowed to. When it became public knowledge, Hyuna's contract was terminated while E-Dawn's future with the label Cube was briefly deliberated upon, establishing a clear double standard that while a male performer in a relationship may be marketable, a woman in one isn't acceptable. Shortly afterwards, it was decided that E-Dawn's contract would also be terminated, and the group disbanded as a result. Despite music labels requiring their talent to be seen living a life devoid of romantic relationships or presenting themselves with desires for companionship, they still use sex appeal to market their idols. In the case of women, although among the hundreds of performers there's a spectrum of personalities on display, there are essentially 2 layers of how idols are supposed to be perceived by the public. The first layer is that they're supposed to be seen as strong, independent, and have full ownership of their sexuality. The second layer is that of a far more submissive and innocent woman that exists to pander to the male gaze, a term used to describe how women in the media are visually crafted by male producers to pander to heterosexual males. Of course, there are people of other genders and sexualities that enjoy K-pop and how idols look and act, but this 2-layer portrayal of women has existed long before K-pop, most notably with pop starlets in the West such as Britney Spears, Miley Cyrus, etc. Both men and women within K-pop are presented in this fashion, but women in particular are often portrayed in a patriarchal context as the paradoxically sexually experienced virgin, and this in turn turns them into a commodity to sell records and merchandise. As a result of this commodification, audiences can sometimes fail to consider idols as no more than dolls that exist for their entertainment, removed of any autonomy, devoid of emotions and complexity, ending up in what could best be described as dollification, where the performer is seen as nothing more than a doll, existing to entertain and visually.
That night, a woman dressed in white glided out of a grove of dark pine.
Forkæl din hud med Placirs.
That night, a woman dressed in.
Unlike the majority, some Venus figurines such as Galgenberg and Impudic are quite slim. Another figure not like the others is actually a stone relief carving. This Venus looks like the others, but it is interestingly holding a horn. It is hypothesized that the notches in the horn may represent the number of lunar cycles or even menstrual cycles. I find this horn-holding Venus to be one of the most fascinating examples of Paleolithic art known. However, this may be evidence that there was not one theme for these figurines. They likely had very different meanings for different people. The diversity could possibly be related to a diversity in sexual preference or social standards. This diversity does make it quite challenging to hypothesize a possible theme. Many possible explanations have been proposed. They have long been seen as symbols of fertility or possibly some sort of deity. Many are critical of this theory and some disregard it altogether. Personally, I find it quite likely that they represent an abstract concept of fertility. If you are a big fan of the channel, you may have seen my second episode on ancient artifacts. In it, I talked about the Egyptian fertility god of Min. This god was often worshipped by carrying around little statues and celebrating him at festivals. Of course, we cannot make one-to-one comparisons, but it is pretty reasonable to assume these figurines had something to do with fertility. The Stone Age was a time of intellectual darkness. Humans have always tried to understand the world, and in a time before society or organized religion,
That night, a woman dressed in white glided out of a grove of dark pines. Blind Marie Antoinette had done her duty to France and Austria, even though the baby was a girl. She named her Maria Theresa Charlotte, after her mother.
Drop your weapon! Put your weapon on the ground! Put your hands up! I said get your hands up! Now turn around!
Johnny-come-latelys, usurping control for the last 200 years of a civilization that had been up and running for thousands.
The Mycenaeans took up the trappings of Minoan culture with relish and no little respect, but inevitably they changed things. This tomb is of a type entirely new to the island, the monument of a warrior culture, a fortified treasure house, here to assert clan prestige and individual honour, alien concepts to the Minoans. Visible and possibly even dominant. So what it seems to me is that the Kouros represents a breakaway cult.
Johnny-come-latelies, usurping control for the last 200 years of a civilization that had been up.
The tablets turned out to be the contents of a Bronze Age filing cabinet, a meticulous record of the business end of palace life.
This one deals with a shepherd called Poros and details his flock.
We know that he had 28 rams and 72 ewes. It's an extraordinary thought that every itinerant herdsman up on the hillside was being monitored by the bean counters in the palace down below.
It's not a grand history, but it still short-circuits you straight into the lives of the people. There are references to bronzesmiths, bakers and farmers, and even the individual names of oxen: dusky, noisy and spotty. We also get a glimpse of loftier beings, some of the gods and goddesses worshipped at places like Knossos.
A number of the tablets record offerings to the religious powers. Here, there are 2 litres of olive oil offered to Pipituna, an early Minoan goddess. Down here you can see that there are 12 given to all the other gods, and the lucky priestess of the winds gets 36. Clearly, worship had its bureaucratic side too.
That night, a woman dressed in white glided out of a grove of dark pines. Blinded by his desire to prove his devotion, the cardinal was convinced it was the queen herself. He never knew that the woman behind the broad-brimmed hat was a prostitute.
Maybe he's in love with her, maybe he's not. But he wants to be in her good graces.
The cardinal bowed and kissed the hem of the prostitute's dress. "You may now hope," she said mysteriously, "that the past will be forgotten."
Jasé parce qu'on se demandait ce qui pouvait bien se passer puisqu'on ne pouvait pas voir la reine parce qu'elle était chez elle. On l'accuse de faire des choses tout à fait réprouvées par la morale publique, d'avoir une sexualité débridée et de ne pas jouer son rôle d'épouse et de mère.
As Marie Antoinette flouted court etiquette and poured money into her whimsical hideaway, rumor spread and resentment grew, at a time when France was rife with discontent.
Was more Nazi than nurture. When a son left for battle, his mother would issue a traditional farewell. With your shield, or on it. In other words, either come back victorious, or come back dead. But if a son failed to live up to this injunction, he could expect little sympathy from Mum. One story goes that a mother, confronting her runaway son, hitched up her skirts and asked him if he intended to crawl back where he'd come from. Following the defeat of Persia, there'd been few opportunities for Spartan men to make their mothers proud. But that was all about to change. As part of their state education, the thigh flashers would come down here to the banks of the Eurotas in what one poet described as the Nicta di Ambrosias, the ambrosial night. The poet goes on to evoke scenes of ritual ecstatic dances and choral contests, the girls singing to each other of limb-loosening desire, tossing their long hair, being ridden like horses and exhausted by love. It's no surprise that Sparta was one of the few ancient cities that had the reputation for encouraging girl-on-girl sex. Women and men in Sparta were used to living separate lives. At the age of 7, boys would be sent away to the agoge, the tough, uncompromising Spartan system where they'd be schooled in the art of war. Male bonding wasn't just encouraged, it was compulsory. At the age of 12, a boy was paired with an older man, usually one of the unmarried warriors aged between 20 and 30. This man would have looked after the boy's material needs and was responsible for his care and conduct. He was a surrogate mother and father, as well as a teacher and mentor. But he was also a lover, for institutionalized pederasty was a part and parcel of life for the Spartan warriors. These intimate relationships seem to have had lasting psychological and emotional effects on the men. When the time came for them to get married, it must have been a difficult adjustment to make. But the pragmatic Spartans came up with an unusual way to help them through their wedding night. The Spartans practiced a custom called marriage by capture. On her wedding night, a bride would have her head shaved, like a small boy in the agoge. She'd be dressed in a man's cloak and sandals and left alone in a dark room. Meanwhile, her husband would quietly leave the common mess, come to her, lay her down on a straw pallet, have sex with her, and then slip back to sleep with his comrades as usual. This wasn't just a quaint wedding night ritual. It could carry on for months or even years.
merchandise. As a result of this commodification, audiences can sometimes fail to consider idols as no more than dolls that exist for their entertainment, removed of any autonomy, devoid of emotions and complexity, ending up in what could best be described as dollification, where the performer is seen as nothing more than a doll, existing to entertain and visually appeal. When the audience's perception is challenged though, and the performer expresses humanity, whether it's engaging in a romantic relationship, speaking out against injustice, or even making a mistake, this dissonance can lead to fans reacting negatively, which results in the frequent occurrence of idols being cyberbullied, and even stalked by fans who try to reach through to them to apologize or change their ways in order to suit their narrative. Understandably, this all takes a toll on their already fragile mental state. Because of this brutal lifestyle where idols are physically and emotionally tested by their music label and fans, there are understandably repercussions to this. Many performers in the industry suffer from consistent depression, anxiety, and exhaustion. Although some idols have been open about their struggles with mental illness in interviews, there is still very much a taboo, and it's expected of them to maintain a facade of happiness, energy, and perfection for fans. Bear in mind that when K-pop stars are going through the process of becoming an idol, it's during their formative teenage years. It can alter their perception of the world and take a tremendous mental toll. After their debut, they're put in front of the world to be judged by the public, where they have to meet the ludicrously high expectations of their fans and endure criticisms about their appearance, performances, and even sexist remarks on social media. In an article by Teen Vogue about how discussing mental health is a taboo in K-pop, they mentioned that when they reached out to talk to an artist about their hardships, their management outright refused them to ask any questions about it. Suga and RM from BTS have been more open about their struggles with depression and anxiety, and even mentioned that they've been seeking professional help. When talking to the Korean outlet Yonhap, Suga said that anxiety and loneliness seem to be with me for life. Emotions are so different in every situation and every moment, so I think to agonize every moment is what life is. Members of BTS are a rare exception in the industry though, as their label has given them
And the next time the Sultan called for Hurrem, she replied she was unworthy of his attention since she was soiled meat.
And of course this intrigues Suleiman, piques his...
A deadly rivalry had reached into the harem. It was not simply a question of who would occupy the Sultan's bed. It was a far more vital conflict over who would produce the next ruler of the Ottoman Empire. The new favourite, Hurrem, or the old favourite, Mahi Devran.
Mahi Devran was the mother of the oldest son. So that Hurrem coming in, obviously being the Sultan's new favourite, was a threat to her.
According to Venetian reports, Mahi Devran picked a fight with Hurrem and called her soiled meat.
A piece of...
Hey, I'm at gate 6 wearing a grey shirt.
and even mentioned that they've been seeking professional help. When talking to the Korean outlet Yonhap, Suga said that anxiety and loneliness seem to be with me for life. Emotions are so different in every situation and every moment.
Now when it comes to the title of this video, The Evils of K-pop, I have a feeling that a lot of people are going to assume that I'm going to talk about the effect of K-pop on the individuals who obsess over it, or maybe even the effect it has on society in general. But mainly what I'm going to talk about here is the effect on the artists and the performers themselves, the inner evils of the K-pop industry. With bands like BTS becoming popular on an international scale to be a very bad thing over the years. Anti-fans have done everything from spreading rumors about these artists, to doxing them, to outright directly hurling harassment at them, to actually physically harassing and harming them in person. Basically, they'll do anything they can to get at these artists. In what is possibly one of the most publicized incidents involving
I 1787-sagen, der er det sidste, hvor hun bor hjemme. I 80, da hun kom ud af børnehuset, der hun flyttet ned i Hungergade hos en, der hedder Rasmus Holsmus. Og det er en længere historie med ham. Han er gift med en meget fordrukken kvinde, og der er ballade med dem. Han søger skilsmisse, og han har boet rundt omkring med forskellige unge kvinder som tjenestepiger, og som kunne have været sådan en lille dreng, der løb rundt og solgte viser. Ham giver de et par mønter, og så får de ham til at råbe, den nye vise om dronning Esther, når hun går forbi. Og så bliver hun altså rigtig sur. Det hjælper heller ikke på historien, at da hun kommer til
Anti-fans have done everything from spreading rumors about these artists, to doxing them, to outright directly hurling harassment at them, to actually physically harassing and harming them in person. Basically, they'll do anything they can to get at these artists. In what is possibly one of the most publicized incidents.
The Petit Trianon gradually came to represent all the Queen's excesses and everything that was going wrong with France. Beyond the palace walls, the people were restless. Taxes were crushing. More and more peasants were losing their land. Increasingly, the people held the government responsible. Louis was powerless to help them. With France already deep in debt, he had drained the French treasury even further by supporting the American Revolution in order to weaken England, providing most of the colonists' guns and nearly all of their gunpowder. But it was the Queen who caught most of the blame. Her extravagance was becoming a ready explanation for the chronic financial crisis and the persistent discontent.
Certains courtisans avaient dit qu'avec l'argent qu'on avait dépensé pour construire le Trianon, on aurait pu améliorer la condition de vie d'un certain nombre de paysans qui étaient pauvres réellement.
The Queen remained blithely aloof and unaware. She continued to indulge her extravagant fantasies, while the French people were crying out for bread. Marie Antoinette, the Austrian, would soon acquire a new name, Madame Deficit.
C'est qu'elle n'a pas fait attention à ce que l'on pouvait dire d'elle. C'est qu'elle a voulu mener sa vie comme elle l'entendait, sans faire attention à ces élémentaires, les devoirs qu'on attendait d'une reine. Est devenue si rapidement un objet de haine.
The growing hatred of the Queen now took the form of underground cartoons, crude, vicious, increasingly obscene. They found an eager audience. The royal censor seemed powerless to stop them.
There's a huge smuggling industry of semi-legal or totally illegal pamphlet literature coming out of Holland, coming out of London, coming out of Switzerland. A group of extremely unscrupulous, kind of scandalmonger journalists decide they can really make a fortune by slagging her off, as we would say in the British Isles.
This video was made possible by Honey. Keep watching to find who invaded France, revolutionized English healthcare, and developed great parklands. Probably not, because of the wife killings. Blah. Blah. Sigmund, how did I get here? I still remember the good old days when I was a boy with a heart full of fire, and Mummy would teach me. Okay, Henry, this is a horse. Can you say horse? Divorce. What? No. Okay, let's try this one. Can you say loaf of bread? Loaf with her head. No, Henry, that's wrong. You know what? Last one. Okay. Can you say soap? Soap. Yes, that's it. I'm the supreme head of the church. Screw the Pope. You know what? You're my son and I love you. but you're freaking weird, man. The year is 1491. England has just come out of 3 decades of civil war, in which a bunch of Henrys, Edwards, and one Richard had a little ding-dong over which royal house should rule the realm. Finally, a Henry won, Henry VII, and he had a son. What should we name him? My royal lineage is full of Henrys. A fine name, a vigorous name, a tenacious name, a muscular name. How about Arthur? And so Arthur, Prince of Wales and next in line to the throne, was born. 5 years later, Prince Henry was born, but nobody cares about him. He's not the heir, just a spare. The king wanted to make an alliance with Spain, so one day he said to his son Arthur, "Hey, baby, you see that lady baby? That's gonna be your wife." "But father, I'm not even 3 years old yet." "Listen, there's something you have to understand. You're my son. But more than that, you're a political bargaining tool." Told Henry that she had not been disagreeing with him, but simply learning from him. And so when the guards came to arrest her, the king told them to make like an M and cleave. Catherine Parr stayed with Henry right until the end. As he aged into his later years, in increasing pain and ill health, he grew ever more suspicious and moody. The once generous, promising young king was now feared by all around him. "Sigmund, I don't have much longer. Hold me." "Of course, sire. Do you have any final wishes?" How about...
Few events of the last 250 years had an impact on the Western world quite like the French Revolution. It marked a turning point in political history. Now, at this point it needs to be understood that many people who supported the original revolution did not support this new direction it was taking. They had wanted France to be a constitutional monarchy, and they opposed anti-Catholic policies. But the revolution had now become like a freight train with no brakes. Moderate revolutionaries would soon join the nobility and church in persecution. In August 1793, France was still on the back foot in its war against Austria and Prussia. To turn the tide of the war, the government implemented military conscription for all French males aged 18 to 25. The law was one of the first of its kind in Europe. Now, imagine you're a French citizen who goes to church, liked the monarchy, and is now being conscripted to fight for the very government that's destroying both.